teacher, rapper,
Only when it's dark.
and God knows what else. And we have Hannah Maloney, writer, activist, educator, tea towel maker, and many other things as well. Yay. All right, we're going to cover a bit of each of these fine and fabulous humans' practice, and then have a bit of a chat about art and activism as activism as art, and then hopefully have some question time as well. So could we have our first slide, please?
Oh, we can't. I'm doing that.
Oh, does it work? Woo! We're going to start with Brenna.
That's me.
Hi, Brenna. So, where's my questions? I would like to know from you, how do you define art activism, and what does it mean to you in the context of what you do?
Thanks, Kay. Art as activism is what I call most of what I do, and it just kind of came together when I started using my illustration skills, my creative skills towards making the world a better place. It actually happened. Can I talk about this for a couple of minutes?
Yes.
All right. I'll just keep, you're the boss.
But it'll mean that your slides go faster.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I started out as a fine artist and spent most of my life really working towards the goal of creating beautiful works that had a huge amount of skill in them, and conveying portraits and the figure and landscapes and still lifes with photorealism through the medium of watercolours. And that was my passion. It excites me still to this day. But at some point I realised it wasn't quite enough. When we're thinking about the big issues of our time, I actually did a permaculture design course and thought, oh no, I've been horribly misguided and spent so much time and energy working on something that's actually not helpful at all. And a couple of years later, Dave Holmgren asked me to illustrate retro suburbia, and the answer I'd been looking for fell out of the sky and into my lap, and I thought, illustration, I can combine my passion for art, my obsession with creative expression, with a message in a way that can actually help to make the world a better place. That, for me, Kirsten, is what art as activism means.
Beautiful. And I remember that period of time watching you go from someone who was clearly an activist and a permaculturalist, and was doing these watercolour illustrations, and then the Retro Suburbia project came into being, and I just remember you going exponential in terms of your articulation, and all these other drawings and things started coming out of you, and it was very interesting to watch that progression, because it was like it was all there in you, and it synthesised in a very short period of time and started just blowing out everywhere, which was amazing.
Yeah, it was fun times.
Yeah.
When Dave was like, can you illustrate my book? I had to go Google what illustration meant, so I wasn't really sure. It's art where the message comes first, as opposed to art where the skill or the beauty comes first.
How many illustrations did you do for that book?
Over 300, Kirsten. It took me 4 months, full time, no days off, no breaks, just David there cracking a whip. Yeah, more illustrations. No, we needed quince tree, not a lemon tree. If you're interested, come to my talk with Rob Alsop on being an illustrator for Rosemary Moore and David Holmgren tomorrow. It'll be really funny.
Woo. Do you want to take us through your practice and show us how that your art makes a difference?
Yeah, sure. Here are some... Ooh, who would like to see an example of art as activism from what it means to me? All right, here's some I prepared earlier. Before we get there, I just thought for like a thought experiment, I emptied out this file on my computer that says my art on stuff. And these were just to paint a picture of what art is capable of. And I'm not saying I'm particularly talented or special, but it has turned up. There is like a vehicle in there with a screen on the side that goes to sustainability events in City of Casey. There are banners for City of Moreland, now called Mary Beck in Melbourne. There's magazines. Like, this stuff is needed. If you're a creative being, whether it's art or dance or music, get your stuff out there with a message, because people are so hungry for this stuff. I put a course together through Series Environmental Centre. It's a permaculture paradise cafe, educational centre, city farm in Melbourne, fantastic place. And they did some online courses during the pandemic. And they said to me, okay, put this course together, and as part of that, we need you to analyse what you do and talk about it in a way that other people can understand. And it was such an interesting experience to draw out of me what I just kind of do. One of the things I realised through that process is that my art has different categories. So this is one example of about 7 categories of work that I produce in Art as Activism. I call it Yes and it compares 2 things side by side. I've got a resilient food system, I've got a fragile food system. Here we've got industrial agriculture, we've got permaculture. So we're showing a way that is and another way that is. This permaculture side is happening all over the place, but maybe it's less visible than industrial agriculture. And you can say a lot through images. That's what I was striving to do with this illustration. Is my pace okay, Kirsten? Should I be going more quickly?
I reckon about 110 on what you're doing now. In a loving way.
I read about, this is actually an article that came out of the North American Permaculture Convergence in 2014. A group of people got together and wrote a beautiful piece on decolonising permaculture. So again, taking something that really interested me and presenting it in a new form so that it's accessible to different audiences. Their article can't really be shared on Instagram. This image can, and was shared bazillions of times by people who found it resonated with them. So often in my art as activism, I'm uplifting other people's voices, things that I've found interesting, and also unlocking something in that image to make it more accessible. Okay, here we have a caterpillar eating things, pooping, and then still eating things. That is the current system. Growth is good. We're screwed. A caterpillar eating things, pooping a lot, and then rest in peace, caterpillar. And down the bottom, transformation is in order. Caterpillar eating things, turning into a chrysalis, and then becoming a butterfly that says, oh my God, this is so cool, the hippies were right. There are many ways to talk about economics, and I mean, if you're clever about it and you bring a sense of humour to it, and also using cartoons is an intentional thing that I do. There is colour, there is expression. People have studied people's eyeballs, where they look, and also what centres light up in our brains, which reflects our emotions. This style of drawing has been proven to be the most effective. That's why I do it. So I threw away the traditional training in watercolour portraiture and chose this because it's the most efficient way. It's a lot quicker than trying to create a photorealistic portrait, but also because it's the most effective way. And of the many ways that I could talk about economics personally, I found this was the most fun. Again, on the economics theme, gather your materials, layer carbon with layers of nitrogen, wait a while, distribute and see what grows. I guess through one of the techniques I use is humour, and I lean quite heavily on this technique because it helps us to see heavy issues in a new light. And I also, putting these out on social media, and yes, social media is problematic. They're huge multinational corporations that have caused a lot of rifts in society, but they've also been able to connect people and strengthen environmental movements. Putting these out on social media, you have a pretty good gauge of where people are at, and people really like the funny ones. So I'm taking that on board. Visual metaphor here, how privilege works. Again, a big issue that's quite difficult to understand. This has been, I've had so many teachers from pre-primary level all the way up to tertiary education take this. I give it to them for free. It's part of my activism, is spreading these images around. They use them print them out in their classrooms or use them in their lectures, because it really encapsulates something that is a big conversation, an important one, and that can be difficult to explain in words. I think that might be it. Oh yeah, I'll finish on that. I don't need to say much about that one aside from, you know, permaculture's fun and chickens get into your garden. We've all been there.
Awesome. I look forward to coming back and asking you a few questions about illustration as a lens, because we often talk about things like that, but as a concentrating lens in the way that you use it, I think it's just very powerful. Laura.
Hi.
Hi. How did you come to do the work that you do?
Well,
And you can slide at this point, or you can just roll and then do your slides, depending on what you'd like to do.
Well, I had the traditional art school experience. Did a year, travelled a year, did a year, travelled a year. The second year, I rode around Tassie on my bike for a year and woofed. So, you know, food and activism and that kind of thing is just part of how I had my 20s. So that was inevitably going to be interconnected to whatever I ended up doing. And yeah, I've been working full-time since then in my art practice, and thinking about art as activism and having a regenerative art practice or ecological art practice and cultural working for me is about tuning into place and deep thinking and time and responding to people and locations and having a dialogue with those places. And that might be for people personal situations, because to respond to, say, about platypuses, you need to be well enough, but if you've got internal, you know, things going on, you want to be doing things that might be more abstract or more personal, but it's all different for everybody. And the reason why, for me, I find it so important is because it creates wonder and hope for people, especially children, to dream and use their imagination to be who they want to be and connect with place and learn about the platypus or the XYZ, whatever you want to learn about in terms of whoever you want to work with. Wow. Yeah, so maybe I could talk.
Yeah, I'd love to see some of your work, and I'm really interested as well as a artist working across a lot of different mediums, if it comes up in your slides, like why you choose to use the mediums that you do, because I've been really wondering about that.
So I think drawing, I always say drawing is at the heart of my practice, but that might be drawing with light through a projector, or drawing into maps, or drawing in sand across a beach. And yeah, I guess that's at the heart of it. It's like something that's just sort of inside me. And yeah, so often when sort of I work from project to project, and often the projects are collaborative and participatory and respond to site and things like that. So maybe I could talk about individual projects. And I also, at the moment, I work collaboratively with my partner Will Cheeseman, and we have a team called Will's Project. So I'll point out some of the things that are collaborative. So Weaving Communities was an opportunity to work with a cultural festival for Marion Council, where we created an inside space outside and provided an opportunity for community to come together and a place for them to write on a fridge what they like about their community and what they vision for the future. And then they could weave and plait into the grass and spend time together. This is an example of some of the drawing work into maps. Yeah, and that happens with pastels onto paper. Like, I like to reuse materials. When I first started, it was on the insides of paper envelopes. And then my dad's a geologist, and maps were under the stairs and in op shops, and we live opposite a book mart, so maps became now, they're just 3 map drawers full in my studio full of maps, so it's something that's, that I'm sort of thinking about, as well as what maps mean. There's so much research and investigation to do there. And then what is on the map? Where's the map from? What subject are you drawing into that? There's so much to research and dive into there, so I've done lots of different projects that sometimes start with the map and sometimes start with the idea. It all changes. This is another example of drawing into things. So this is a collaboration with James Tyler. He's an artist with Ghana and Maori and European heritage. He's a photographer, and this was a series called Hidden Landscapes about the history of Kangaroo Island. Particularly the pre-settlement history to do with the whalers.
Wow.
We also did a series called Forgotten Wars, where we were referencing the war maps that are in the South Australian Library, which are, like all of the wars, like, the documentary series, The Australian Wars, that's out at the moment on SBS. So the documentation of all these horrific events was something that James was researching at the time, and he started drawing maps over his photographs, and and we were chatting, and we began a collaboration to work together. So we did 2 different series.
Wow.
One of the other projects I work with sometimes is about waterways, and this project was called Creek Law with Open Space Contemporary Art, and it was about waterways and who owns water, water as it flows through public and private space. And we had different speakers along the way. We had a wild lawyer, a First Nations person, a forager, a community choir, and invited the local community to come and walk that watercourse. And it's something that would be great to do in other sections of anywhere, especially in Adelaide, where the water just disappears under the road and you don't even know that it's there. It's a passion. This was a large-scale sand drawing where the Port Jackson sharks aggregate at Port Noarlunga at the reef there. So Rebecca McEwen and I did a project for a series of Unexpected Events Festival and drew hundreds of Port Jackson shark babies over the day. And I often have contentious feelings with myself about what the best way to work is as an artist, and why, how, and what I use materials, because I use pastels and I use paint sometimes. And when I do a project that just washes away at the end of the day, it makes me feel really like, But at the moment, there's not one way of working or one answer that I have found, or that I probably won't ever find, so yeah. Here's some examples of the large-scale cardboard builds that Will and I have been doing lately. So we first started making them maybe 15 years ago, where we made sort of humpies or shelters, and we were really interested in vernacular architecture and makeshift and camping outside, outdoor living and things like that. And then we had twin boys a couple of years later, and then we had a break from that kind of thing. So we've just been getting back into it, and we had our first sort of exhibition after 10 years together, where we built the moth, and we had this really beautiful time researching the rain moth and thinking about how its life is underground for 7 or 8 years, and just getting in tune with another perception of time. And then inviting kids to draw into and create eggs and add them to the sculpture. So for me, the great challenge for each project is to have something that is participatory, so that everyone can come and feel like they're involved in the artwork, and also collaborate with people, so that you can, like scientists or anything. Food nutritionists, we made a giant mealworm for Wom Adelaide, and the food nutritionist, Ishka Bless, was talking about eating insects for climate change, and that was really fun. And we've made the worm for outside here, which is also talking about transformation of soil and impermanence, and has the worm farm that you can feed at your compost scraps after lunch.
When's your next session, working on the worm outside?
After lunch. We'll do another session tomorrow, maybe each day after lunch, another building session. We did a session with the kids this afternoon that was really fun, and you can draw garden stories into the worm. Yeah, so always trying to think about how to interact. These are some examples of some map drawings that were for a part of a feminist festival, and I wanted to celebrate women who grow food. Food is another passion of mine, and in 2011 I did my PDC and also used permaculture as a methodology when I did my honours at art school, and was looking into food security and food miles, and I had the great chance to draw Hannah and Anne-Marie, which was really fun, and celebrate growing food, which is really awesome.
If you want to just go back one, can I just say, Laura, that this is how I met you, the one of Hannah, coming to Hannah's house on the regular and seeing this like Technicolor kaleidoscopic Hannah, and I was always like, wow, who did that? And she's like, oh, it's my friend Laura. And yeah, it's great to be sitting here with you and seeing all these, and Anne-Marie, and whoever those awesome other people are.
Yeah, that's on a map of Tasmania too, which is nice. And that's Claudia, who is doing the kids program, and Lucy, who's also here. She's just been studying permaculture. She works at Village Greens.
Yep.
And Diana Bickford, who runs, what's the name of her business? Bickley Vale Farms. Yeah, she grows beautiful seedlings.
Gorgeous. I have one more question for you. When you were proposing projects that are pretty wacky, so like I want you to, it's going to be 3 months development, we're going to, there's money involved, there's a budget, and I'm going to draw these sharks, and at high tide, that'll be the end of that. Do you ever feel like you have to pare back or tone down your ideas because like they're not going to fund a giant cardboard moth? Or do you feel that given your experience and your, ability to figure out what will both read and also what people will go for, how do you go with pitching such projects?
Yeah.
I'll phrase it another way. Sorry, that was a big question. Yeah. How often do the awesome, wacky, this is how I want to represent this thing, how often do they get up? Probably a bit of reality check for any, aspiring artists in the room. But
a big part of projects is that beautiful beginning stage where you get to do that and you get to imagine everything. And part of the next part is doing that, which is bringing it in. And yeah, it's a tricky one with budgets and money and art because they don't necessarily friends all the time, or they are sometimes and they aren't sometimes. So it can be really tricky. And I guess each project informs and helps the next one. I guess that's what I can say in terms of, how can you do it and make it happen and keep it within its realm of it could be this, but in reality, or how can you make it actually achievable or successful? Yeah, put a nice little thing around it.
Yeah, yeah. So what was the Peter Cundall quote? Play it straight and infiltrate, which isn't what you're doing, but it has an edge to it. In the work we used to do, we used to call it going in deep cover. You just go in looking as straight as possible and get the job done. Awesome. Thanks, Laura. Hannah, why do you think it's important to have activism as a thread through the art that you do?
Oh, yeah, so I'm not a trained artist. I trained in community cultural development, which is a type of community development that encourages practitioners to use any creative mean to engage people around issues that are important to them at that time, and then to use the creative means to progress conversations in their favour, to progress their lives in whatever way that looks like. And so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but for me, when I was studying, my creative outlet was always working with plants, gardens, soils and farms and compost. And I hooked onto that study and went, I can use this to weave through my passion of working with landscapes and people. I always really love working with people in an education and kind of mobilising capacity. And so that's kind of where I hatched onto it. I said, this kind of study framework with permaculture, it's really useful to weave through creative means. And I think that's going to really help. The creative means really encourages and engages and invites people in, and then you can just thread through this conversation, this narrative. It's almost invisible, but not quite. And that's a really beautiful thing. So the types of things I do, should I go through?
Well, I was really struck when we were talking about this panel, and Hannah was a little bit like, I'm not really an artist. And I was like, you're just like the illustrator of an award-winning book, and, just illustrated a second book. And
with Laura. Laura's helping on my second book.
With Laura on the second book as well. And we have heard from you today, and we have some sense of your practice and of your activism and of your world. But what really struck me thinking about your projects is how much your projects, which I think a lot of them you don't consider art projects at all, but how much they conjoin with what contemporary art is happening in Australia at the moment. I mean, a lot of my contemporaries from when I were young are now doing interdisciplinary projects that have scientists, farmers and artists involved, or, they're these huge wide-ranging projects that follow entire watersheds down to the sea with like 40 different contemporary artists involved at every stage of the game. And I'm personally now in a position, because of my history, to be advising on these projects, which is absolutely wonderful to have your art friends come back around and go, so watershed restoration, can you point me at some resources? So a lot of the projects that you've done in the name of permaculture, in the name of community building, it's really interesting to me how really neatly they're intersecting with what we know to be contemporary art at the moment, because these are the issues at hand, these are the things that people want to get crunchy with, and as a result, could see any of your projects, any of your history, actually, as activist art, if you wanted to see it that way. So.
Yeah, and I guess Laura made a great point when we were chatting earlier, is that it's hard to fit a lot of these things into boxes. Yeah. They're creative, and that happens in so many different ways. I think that's probably super relatable for all our work, really. We do what works, we do what play to our strengths and the opportunities of that time. But I'll show you some of the stuff.
Show us some of
we've got
stuff
up here, and it's all very like people, 3D, moving things. So I work with local councils. I'm very good at, I am moderately okay at getting small grants to do things in the community, because it's hard to monetise this stuff. So I'm very practiced at writing grants. And I work with the City of Hobart, down Nipaluna, Hobart, and we do something called the Home Harvest Edible Garden Trail. What's that got to do with art? Well, like hundreds and hundreds of people come through like dozens of gardens, and they have these amazing interactions in these really varied gardens, ranging from a few pot plants in a rental courtyard to quite elaborate urban spaces. And they have all these cool interactions and ideas, and they leave all sparkly and like, ooh, that's a really beautiful transformation from seeing people come into a gate and then walk out in a really different space, and a really different way of being. And we just finished our fourth one a few weeks or months, I can't remember, maybe a month ago. And over the past 4 years, there's been such wild feedback. Hey Hannah, check out what I've done. Like with their garden or with their community, replicating these types of events elsewhere, because these are patterns that we can repeat and spread really easily. And that's wonderful to see. So I do things like that in different forms. What else do I do? I do large composting artwork. There's another photo there that didn't work. I don't know why.
That one was at night, that one.
Yeah.
I'll start
so
wrapping.
this isn't my artwork. This is a fantastic artist called Rochelle Tribot, who's now based in Meanjin, Brisbane. But I said, hey, Rochelle, I want to make giant educational artworks about how to compost, and I want to stick them on billboards in the city. So we got another grant, and we did a series of things. This was one of the outcomes. And it's a shame that photo doesn't work, because it has me and like a little ant in the corner, just to show you the scale. And it stayed up for like 3 months, and it was so fun. Like we had lots of workshops and other activities that would come and go associated with them. And it was cool. Like I just loiter around sometimes and just watch people interact with them on their daily lunch break or whatever that might be. And I love that, because usually billboards are places for like, hey, buy me, consume me, drink me, look like me, whatever that might be. And this one's like, hey, have a go at composting all your waste. Like, awesome. Love that. So billboards can be awesome if we get hold of them. And I showed one of these photos this morning, a compost relay race, performance art to its most beautifulness. And that's, a lot of my things will be educational, maybe all of them actually. What's that word? Is it, it's like educate/entertain? Edutainment, that one. And so I'm really interested in that concept, because that's where people have fun, they engage, they learn stuff, and they often adopt things as well, I've noticed. I've tried lots of different types of activism or change behaviour methods, and this is by far my most successful, like by 2,000%. And the one on the right is celebrating, I did another different compost project as a theme with another local council. And the two people up there, David, Stephen and Margaret Stedman, you probably won't know them, but they're like Lutruwita, Tasmania legends in the sustainability and gardening movements. What a wonderful opportunity to celebrate these gorgeous heroes in our communities, elevate them, shine a light on them, and of course run some great messaging through that as well. Absolute legends. And I just think that's artwork, actually. Put in some plastic crowns, awesome. Sometimes I do things like make educational tea towels where I do drawings. Why? I don't know. My partner said, hey, because I love drawing, but I never have a reason to draw. He's like, make some educational tea towels. I'm like, okay. It turns out they're really fun and people like them. And I wrote a book, and I know writing is a different medium, but I really find it enormously creative. Storytelling, enormously creative. And I don't know if that's not allowed in this conversation.
It's totally allowed in this conversation.
But I think with a lot of these activism messages, you can wrap them up in certain ways, and there's many right ways depending on your context that you're in to reach different audiences and get different outcomes. And I really love wrapping things up in ways that inspire people, warm their hearts, make them think, make them a bit more curious, and make them want to be there, inspire them towards action, whatever that might be. And so that's what these two little things do, which has been fun. And I did put my garden up there because that's been, I keep coming back to it as something, as maybe a wonderful creative expression of working with landscape. And I've learnt so much about, really pragmatic things about soil and water and plants and animals. But I've learnt so much more about stuff that's harder to articulate, about how to be a good human, and that's never ending. It's quite challenging, but it's a really fun exploration.
Beautiful. I'd like to hear a bit about your heroes, each of you, and also if there's an art practice or an action or a creative action, if you like, it's either singular or an ongoing project that's just the one that you're just like, oh my God, I love how they did that. Could be from before, could be from now. Who are your heroes, Laura?
Well, I've lots and lots, and a couple of the artists I've been really inspired by lately. For example, Jane Bamford. She makes ceramics, and she made thousands of artificial spawning habitats out of ceramic for fish in the Derwent Estuary, and also penguin homes for Kangaroo Island out of ceramic. And I thought that was just so beautiful. She's making artwork for wildlife. And one of the others might be what's happening, the Cultural School of Kandos, School of Cultural and Adaptation, getting a small country town and changing its whole vibe by the concrete factory closing. What can happen? Some artists can move in, and they can have festivals and invite people in and be there and get people together that don't normally come together and talk and maybe not agree, but be and learn to disagree in a respectful way. It's a really great role for art, I think. Yeah. I might think of some other.
That's right. Anyone that's here, I would recommend you check out the KSCA, which is the Kandos School of Cultural Adaptation. Kandos is a little bitty town that had a cement works which closed, leaving property prices and socioeconomic injustice very, very, very high. Property prices low, injustice high. And yeah, since that time, which was started about 10 years ago, it has flowered and mycelially spread into this New South Wales and Queensland-wide network of arts projects. There's a project that's got at least 40 artists involved, contemporary artists and permaculturalists and all sorts of people, called An Artist, a Scientist, an Artist and a Farmer Walk into a Bar. Don't judge the name. It's this ongoing project. It's very wide-ranging, and it's an amazing synthesis of contemporary artists coming in, and they're just sort of like, I want to do something with soil. And then you've got the scientist coming in, and then you've got the farmer who agrees to participate, who's often quite a conventional farmer, and these projects are multi-year, and seeing what comes out of it in terms of soil carbon, seeing what it comes out of it in terms of, riparian and watershed restoration. People have changed the entire crop planting schemes. Some farms have just changed everything about how they do everything, because one, they were listened to as a practitioner. They'd had an artist who was matched with them, who was beautifully creative and empathetic enough to not be what you should do. And then you had a soil scientist from New England or from the Soil Food Web Academy sometimes come in, and between the three of them, yeah, there's some really amazing stuff there, so I encourage you to check that out. Just a shout out for that project. Yeah. Brenna.
Yeah, I was thinking like artist or illustration or cartooning heroes. All I can think is throwing back to like the early days of webcomics where we had Hyperbole and a Half, XKCD, the Oatmeal, who's still going. I remember those people were doing something that was so unusual in making these online comics back before 2010. Nothing existed before COVID, but there were things before smartphone era. But when heroes and people that inspire me in my art activism work, to mention a few who aren't on this panel or in this room, of which there are many here, would be people like Vandana Shiva, Damon Gamo, had great chats with him about how to get the message out there in a way that really works for a certain audience. He's one of the people behind the film 2040. People who really dedicate their whole being to creative messaging, because I don't know of any illustrators or cartoonists that are really doing quite what I do. So in some ways I feel it is quite isolating. It's interesting, my partner Charlie, you might have seen his band last night, he has a whole group around him of musicians. We're always at festivals, we're always at gigs, he plays in a band, there's 20 fabulous musicians on any one song on any one of his albums, and I don't really have that. But what I gain strength from my heroes are the people who are working like I am to really think about communication on these big issues. Giordano, he's a mate of ours from Juice Media. He does the honest government ads, which are a very, if you haven't heard them, look them up, witty and creative way to comment on our political system in Australia and also to motivate change. So that's what comes to mind for me, for my heroes. And if there are people doing work like mine, I'd love to meet you and have a yarn, because sometimes it's lonely from my lounge room with the iPad, wondering if anyone actually even cares about it all. No, it's all right. It keeps me busy.
What about you, Hannah?
What comes to my mind is when I think back about Australian activism, there's a few images that stick to my head, and there's some of the people who've done really creative, kind of iconic actions which have turned into photographs which live on. And that's to do with the nuclear campaigning over many decades, and for me, the Tassie Forest campaigns over decades as well. Angels sitting in trees, these nuclear, I don't know what they are, gas masks, I think his name was Benji, on the drums. These things have burned in my mind, and they're really powerful, and the beautiful heroes. I go to street festivals growing up and they're doing some, I don't know, improvised theatre thing about no nuclear and Indigenous rights. I'm like, oh, that's beautiful. I love this stuff. This stuff is so gold. It's just really raw and very of the moment, very of the time, and it just kind of capturing that essence. I just love it. I just can't get enough of it. So many examples, but they're just a few that stick with me.
Can I share another couple? Lucine Ricard's Extinction Studies, where she does the most exquisite, gorgeous drawing of an extinct or near to be extinct animal and then erases it as a performance. It's just a very poetic, beautiful example of a great work, I think. And closer to home, a colleague of mine, Louise Flatty, during COVID, she did a project called Grassland Straw with me, where she invited people to go through the species list of native grasses in her area and draw together with her and then post the images as a great sort of social project. Yeah.
Mm. So you're all making art which has an activist edge, and with an activist edge comes feedback in all the kinds from all the people who see the art, especially if it's on social media, because we're so good at saying things on social media that we definitely wouldn't say to someone's face in real life. And at the same time, that immediate feedback on social media about what's resonating with people, what's floating their boat, what's really turning them on when you share either the artwork illustration itself or the outcome or what you've done. How much does that feed into, because it is quite lonely work, because I don't think, well, you have your partner on some projects and you work collaboratively, but you don't have a squad around you for any of these projects. And Brenna, you work by yourself, and Hannah, you're a mixture of like you in lockdown doing your little thing, your big thing, and working collaboratively. Any thoughts on the immediacy of the feedback that comes from doing activist art on social media, and how that works for you?
It's funny, like when I'm there at my local cafe and I get my one drink and I stay there way too long and they never kick me out because they're really nice. It almost feels like there is a squad of us working on an illustration, and I look around and it's just me. And there's Summer who runs the cafe mopping the floor like it's closed. Oh. I guess, with the ability to share things online these days, part of why I do these images, I've dabbled in animation and stop motion and a whole bunch of other things, but I've chosen to stick with the images, at least for now, because they are so inherently shareable. They can elevate a quote, they can elevate text, they can shift the meaning of an image, like a bunch of caterpillars there. They can shift the meaning of a song, like the Single Ladies, the chicken one back there before. And when people connect with an image, it can just take off. So that's happening now. 5 years from now, technology may have shifted, the way we interact online and with each other may have shifted, but that's what works for now. And I've actually, interestingly, despite the internet being quite a toxic place for some, have found it almost exclusively supportive and wonderful. And I get dozens of emails every week. Can I use this work in this project? Can I use this thing over here? Can we translate this thing for our permaculture school or for this university? And yes, it seems to be what people are needing. So did that answer the question?
Yeah.
And are we meant to be in question time now?
How are we going for time? Before our 20 minutes? Or we've gone past our 20 minutes? Okay.
Yeah, we all missed that one.
Left. Right, okay, scratch that last. Okay, before we go to questions, what's your best one bit of advice, not that we're being all sort of, one thing, because it's so multifaceted. If a 19-year-old came up to you going, I just want to do like you do, what would you say to them?
I would say...
Anyone.
Get involved and meet people and talk to people and find out what you would like to offer. Not always easy, but...
I would say don't be afraid to be the only one that does what you do. If you are worried that you can't do what these other great people you look up to are doing, look and see what is uniquely yours and work at that, because wow, if we're all doing something that's uniquely ours, we've got way more chance for people to connect with what we're doing than if we're all following somebody.
Nice.
And in addition to that, I totally agree with both those points, is like find some people that you're really keen on and maybe have some capacity to let you stick around a bit. So I'm a great, I've allocated people, I'm like, oh, you're my new mentor, and I haven't even told them. I just keep turning up. and that's been worked really well over the years, especially when you're in a more informal educational path. You're like, oh, how do I crack through this, or how do I learn that thing? You can't often go to clear opportunities. You're just going to work it out, which is a bit windy, but I found locking onto certain people really helpful.
Yeah, and I would second the mentor thing. When I was a young artist, I locked onto mentors and would not let them go, and they eventually gave me something to do other than sweep the floor, and that was really formative. We might go to questions. Millions and millions of questions.
Scary asking a question with a microphone.
So terrifying. Kirsten, you did kind of ask this question and then skipped over it a little bit, so kind of just wanted to come back to it. Being on social media, you do get some people who have pretty extreme responses to your work, and it can be, for me, it really knocks my confidence, and I'm just wondering how all of you deal with that. When you get a comment that, really hits you, what do you do to kind of come back up and keep going?
I kind of walk around in circles a little bit and get really confused. and then I kind of come up for air and I go, oh, look, yeah, so what? Especially around some of these issues around climate, I don't engage in trying to change anyone's mind, because it's probably not going to happen. I just work with people who want to be in that space. And I also take some comfort in maybe 15 years ago when I was doing this work, not so much on social media, but just in real life, people just verbally yell at me, bringing these things up. They don't do that anymore, and that's really cool. And so that's a good thing. I'm like, oh, look, things are moving forward with or without these people, and we're just going to keep moving forward. I don't like it, though. I really don't like it when it happens.
When I was a baby permie and Kirsten said, get on Instagram, you'll love it, or you might not love it, but you should, she said. And I said, all right. And then I got trolled for the first time. I was so excited. I was like, yes, I'm nearly as cool as Kirsten. I'm getting trolled too. And it's honestly never bothered me that much. I take great pleasure in reporting and blocking people and getting rid of them. Ain't nobody got time for that. It is a sign that you're saying something that people are passionate about. It could also be a sign of Russian bots just doing what bots do best, and that's okay. I do a really great job of getting rid of them off my page. It has, like I said, been overwhelmingly supportive, though. Yeah.
I've got some thoughts on this. Yep. I try to keep in mind that the commenters are the 10% at each end of the spectrum. The, oh my God, I love you, and the, and everybody else in between. There's a lot of those people too. I try to, sometimes I have to literally count. It's like happy, 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 absolutely not happy, 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 and try and keep those things in perspective. I know that we all know that, our brains are geared to flight. They're geared to search for attack, and the effect of that one comment is completely disproportionate to all the other people going, hey, and trying to consciously keep that in mind is important. And at the same time, as an educator, I personally, and I don't recommend everyone do this because it's not going to float everybody's boat, I take the time to reply to everything other than what I feel is offensive, to the point where I would ask that person to leave if I was in a space with them. Everything else I try to reply to because I see that as part of my charter of privilege, and as an educator to have conversations about things while not trying to change someone's mind. If they're like, climate change is bullshit, I don't really worry about those comments. But if there's people that feel narky, but maybe they're misunderstanding, or maybe they're scared, or they're confronted by what it's bringing up, as much as I don't always enjoy it, I feel I have a responsibility to reply to those people as much as possible, which can be exhausting, and I may review that in the future, but at the moment at Milkwood we see that as part of our charter to respond.
Yeah, I had a question about, and it kind of goes to Hannah's slide before about all of us, we're all activists, we can all be activists. Just wondering how can we all be artists as well, to take this creative approach to problem solving that you've shown here. How can we all be more creative in our daily lives, in our permaculture practice?
One of the beautiful things to do, which I'm not doing at the moment, is write, and the gratitude journaling, which could also be gratitude drawing, which if you can take the pressure off any kind of, needs to be any kind of way or thing, and just draw for draw, that can be quite a beautiful thing to do, and maybe to music. But I mean, that would just be a first initial response. Yeah.
It's a beautiful question. I used to live in South America, and I have a very clear memory of teaching a permaculture course with a group of other educators there to a group of people in a small island in Brazil, and we were making a mosaic that ran down a stairwell much like this one. Huge project with lots of people. How do we all connect and make something that looks like a whole when there's so many hands going into this? And there was one guy, Diego, who didn't participate for the first day, but he hung around, he visited a few times. The second day he was looking and still kind of holding back. And on the third morning he came to me before anyone else had arrived and said, "Can I have a go while no one's watching?" And I said, sure, here's the recycled tile, this is how we break them, this is the brief. And he was there from 7 that morning until we packed up at 7 o'clock that evening. And he came up to me with tears in his eyes and said, "I was told that I wasn't artistic as a child, and I was laughed at when I did a drawing when I was younger, and I've held on to those criticisms, and today really helped me see in a safe way that I am artistic and I am creative, and anybody can be." So sometimes it's about finding how you can overcome those demons, because we've all been there. We've all had our creativity stifled, but we were also all expressive as children.
And just to quickly add, I think that's so true. We're all inherently creative, and sometimes we're told we're not. When I was in grade 6, I was kicked out of the school choir because apparently I wasn't good enough, but I loved singing. And so I just didn't sing up until maybe a few years ago. I said to my partner, Anton, you have to buy me a ukulele, and then I'm going to start singing. And I sing really loudly, not the best, but it makes me so happy. And I think it's and it's so exciting just to remember, yeah, of course I can sing. Of course anyone can. Of course anyone can be creative. Doesn't mean you have to be wildly public around it, but it really helps us as a human. It goes, oh, gee, that feels good.
Many artist friends of mine would say that it's all art, which is both wonderful and also inherently unhelpful if you don't feel it is. I would also say that making the functional a little bit more beautiful, or giving yourself another 10% of time or another 10% of budget to make something that little more beautiful, is not an extravagance. It is not a folly. It is part of the whole, and a very nourishing and essential part of that whole, no matter what you're doing. And lastly, I seem to have moved to a town full of art therapists, which I wasn't knowing, what's an art therapist? And now I know, because I have many of them that are friends. And I've got to say, art therapy is pretty darn cool. If you feel blocked in that way, or you feel you haven't had permission, and permission is so much about making art, and in the same way it's about getting active and being an activist, art therapists are actually really great to just help you bust it out and do stuff, and before you know it, you're going home and doing 12 hours of mosaic. So, yeah.
Thank you. With apologies to those who we didn't get to, but these brilliant women are here for the rest of Convergence. Please hunt them down and ask them your questions. And thank you. Kirsten Bradley is a big part of Milkwood, and you'll find all of her brilliant work online. They also have a book available in the foyer. Laura's working on the worm in the arena there. Please go and have a look at her glorious work and draw something. Brenna Quinlan has a stall full of amazing teaching resources and posters and children's books and glorious stuff in the foyer, and it's mostly unstaffed because she's spending all her time sharing. So please duck next door to the Meliodora stand if you want to buy anything. And Hannah's first book, which is a huge bestseller, is also available on the same stand. Would you please thank Kirsten, Laura, Brenna, and Hannah